Well, hello there. I'm John Byrne with Poets and Quants, and I have two fantastic people with me today. We have Caroline Diarte Edwards and Emma Bond from Fortuna Admissions. We're going to address the question what MBA candidates need to know about the world's top international programs. When we talk about international programs at the very top, we're thinking about London Business School, INSEAD, Cambridge Judge, Oxford Saïd. But what makes them genuinely world class and not just an alternative to a US degree?
I'll jump in on that one, John. So I think historically, international business schools have been perhaps seen as a bit of a poor relation. So traditionally, the market's been dominated by the M7 schools, the other top US programs, which of course are amazing. And there's perhaps been a nod to INSEAD, to London Business School. So I think first off, it's important to make clear that these international programs should really be seen as equals now, right? So they're peers to the top US schools. But the thing that really makes them stand out is that they are designed to help people excel and to lead in a very global business environment. So it's not just a kind of single market lens. And I think it's a realization that's growing in momentum. So we've seen in the rankings over the last few years, particularly, that you've got INSEAD, ESSA, LBS, Bocconi, Oxford, Cambridge, HEC, all doing particularly well and improving their rankings. So I think that the result of that is that people are increasingly recognizing that international schools offer them genuine choice outside the US and a really sort of growing geographical flexibility. So these programs are inherently global. They enable you to do an MBA while you're exploring different cultures within a very sort of global classroom, to look at different ways of thinking and develop an international business mindset. So something that can really give you an edge in the global employment market. And I think at the moment, if we look at what's happening, that's something that's particularly important. The other thing, INSEAD, some of the other programs, they're shorter in length, so they tend to be very dynamic, quite practical in their delivery. But I think, just the international perspective, particularly, is something that really does make them stand out from their US counterparts.
Now, as Emma mentioned, many of these programs are only 1 year in length. And in fact, at INSEAD, it's only 10 months. Caroline,
Mhm.
is that enough time?
Yes, well, in fact, that acceleration, that intensity it's a feature rather than a bug with those programs. And INSEAD pioneered the 1 year format nearly 70 years ago now. It was the first MBA program to launch a shorter format. And that format has really stood the test of time. It has been copied by other schools. So many of the international programs have a shorter format of 10 to 12 months. And there are some options as well to do shorter programs at schools like London Business School as well. So at INSEAD, the program is designed to cover about 80% of the curriculum that you would cover in a top US 2 year program. So it is very intense. You will not have time to catch up if you make a slow start. So these schools are very rigorous in terms of selecting candidates who have the academic ability to hit the ground running when they start the program. Because at INSEAD, for example, you're going to have exams every 8 weeks. So the pace is intentionally intense. But that does also, of course, reflect the reality of business. And that's something that recruiters often talk about, that they appreciate with the candidates that they recruit from schools like INSEAD, that they have the ability to cope with a very fast-paced business environment because they have had so much to juggle during their INSEAD experience. Of course, there's also an advantage in terms of the return on investment and the speed with which you can get the career. So you're only stepping out of the workforce for 1 year rather than 2 years, incurring tuition fees and living expenses for 1 year rather than 2 years. So those 1 year programs typically have a very strong return on investment and a short payback period. So that is a big part of the draw, especially for candidates coming from international markets where they might not have had the ability to save as much as candidates coming from, say, the UK or the US, where they would have had substantial salaries pre-MBA. So that shorter format and the lower overall cost is a big part of the appeal.
You know, besides the accelerated timetable, one thing that really strikes me about these programs is the diversity of the MBA cohort. At London Business School, for example, there are more than 60 nationalities in a single cohort. And I wonder, how does that really change the experience, Emma?
So sometimes I still look at statistics like that and think, wow, it's actually really striking. So if you think about what 60 nationalities looks like in a classroom orientation, 60 different cultures, 60 different ways of thinking, communicating, doing business. So, and of course, then it transcends the statistics, right? So if you are doing an MBA at one of these international schools, you are likely to find yourself in a classroom where the dynamic is just very, very different. So, for example, you might be in a study group where you are working alongside people from different cultures, but also different professional backgrounds, different functional areas, different roles. And within that environment, you then have to sort of have your own way of thinking challenged. And what that creates is a very sort of exponential growth throughout the trajectory of your MBA experience. So I think in terms of curriculum, there are multiple opportunities for you to develop that global mindset, develop that global lens. So whether that's project work, consulting projects, treks, global business experiences where you're sort of on the ground in a different country exploring the ways that these different countries do business there. What that means for admissions teams is that the schools are looking actively for that when they recruit. So they're looking to build a very diverse classroom, but also one that's balanced without one sort of single dominant demographic. So when they are looking at candidates, and Caroline and I have both done this back in the day for INSEAD and London Business School, what we were looking for is people who are open to new experiences. And sometimes they'll demonstrate that through having lived abroad, studied abroad, grown up across different cultures and different countries. But sometimes it's things like working in international teams, working on international cross-border transactions. But however that experience shows up in your profile, all of these experiences are valid. And as long as you can sort of make your case for it in a strong application, you will be somebody that the ADCOMs look at and think that could be somebody I want in my classroom.
Right. With the top US schools, most on-campus recruiting feeds into the US market. But I wonder where graduates get their jobs and end up in these international schools. Caroline?
Yeah, that's a key feature of these programs, that they're really designed to be a springboard to an international career. So if you look at the top programs like the ones we've been talking about, INSEAD, London Business School, and so on, typically about half the class take jobs in Europe. It's a little bit less with INSEAD, as INSEAD, of course, also has a Singapore campus, and so there's a substantial number of students staying in Asia Pacific as well. But beyond that rough half of that cohort staying in Europe, the rest are really going all over the world. So students are taking jobs in the Middle East, in Africa, across Asia Pacific, in both North America and South America. So it is an extraordinary springboard for students. And for example, at INSEAD, about 1/3 of the students are changing country compared to where they worked pre-MBA. And a lot of people are achieving some sort of career change, even on these shorter programs. And sometimes people think that if you're doing a shorter program, then it's designed for acceleration within an existing career rather than enabling you to really make a career pivot. But actually, at INSEAD, about 2/3 of the class are making some sort of career change, looking at whether they're changing their function, their industry, or their country. And about 20% of the class are changing across all three dimensions, which is a huge leap if you think about it. So it's challenging for the schools as well, because of course in the US, the schools are largely managing recruiter relationships in their domestic market, whereas Emma and my former colleagues at London Business School and INSEAD, they have to manage a portfolio of relationships around the world. And recruiters are the top companies that will also be recruiting at the top US schools. So companies like McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, Amazon, leaders in consulting, in finance and technology are the major recruiters at these programs, as they are also in the top US schools. But the difference in how they recruit when they come to a school like London Business School versus going to a school like Stanford or Harvard or Chicago in the US is that they will be recruiting for positions around the world, for multiple offices. So if you are looking to have an internationally mobile career, it is an incredible asset to, first of all, be able to go through the on-campus recruiting that opens doors for you around the world. And then, of course, get access to that international network of alumni that will support you with an international career as the years progress after graduation.
So Emma, programs like London Business School, INSEAD, IMD, they're all very strong brands, but they seem to me to be a little bit more contextual than, let's say, a Harvard or a Wharton. What does that mean for a candidate, and how should a candidate think about that?
So I think that, there's no question that the brands like Harvard, Wharton, Stanford are incredibly strong. And Caroline and I and the rest of the team at Fortuna work with a ton of people who are targeting those schools. But I think what's important is to kind of try and separate the global brand name, this sort of recognition that goes with a Harvard or a Wharton, and think also about not forget about brand. You have to definitely consider that, but also think about relevance to your own specific goals. So if the contexts that matter to you are things like international business and building a global career, then schools like LBS, INSEAD, IMD, ESA, they have incredible brand strength that can support you. So I had a conversation actually this morning with a client of mine who is fielding multiple offers, lucky guy, across Europe and the US. He is from Western Europe. I'm not going to go too much into his detail, but he has an offer from a very good school in the US, which is one that he's really been targeting as we've been working together. But ultimately, we were talking about how he makes the choice, and he wants to stay longer term in Western Europe. He has an offer from INSEAD, and he has been given an offer on the Singapore campus, which is where he really wants to be initially to build out some exposure in Asia. So I think what he will eventually decide is that in terms of the relevance to him and his goals and where he wants to be, that offer at INSEAD will make more sense to him even than the offer from the top school in the US that he initially was thinking might be the best sort of option for him. So I think sometimes the better question is not, is this name recognized everywhere, but is it recognized by the employers and the geographies that I care about and the regions that I want to work? And so for a lot of people, I think the answer is yes. And I guess, so from my point of view, given that the brands of the international schools are growing and growing through extra recognition and rankings, through bigger, wider alumni pools, I think that kind of contextual brand strength is actually a benefit because these schools are, as we've been saying, very highly respected in global business circles, not just in one particular geography.
Right. Now, Caroline, another big factor in going to an international school is the alumni network.
Yeah, so when you join an MBA program, you're going to be building incredibly strong relationships with your classmates. So first of all, when you graduate, you're going to have a cohort of a few hundred people who will then disperse around the world, who are a tremendous asset for you for the rest of your career. And I can speak from personal experience. I did the MBA at INSEAD in 2003, and I'm in touch on a weekly, if not daily basis with my classmates still. And it's a tremendous source of support, of introductions, of advice. I see the interaction happening between my classmates and how valuable it is for people. So that's one layer, is that tremendous bond that you will build with your classmates. And of course, people go on to very successful careers in a lot of different domains. And then another dimension is that you get access to the broader alumni network. So all the people who've graduated before you and graduate after you. So at INSEAD, it's about 65,000 alumni around the world. I think London Business School has about 57,000 alumni around the world. So these are pretty serious numbers of people. And as the schools have been feeding graduates into positions across a broad range of industries and a broad range of countries for decades now, that means that pretty much wherever you go in the world, you're going to have access to a local alumni network that can open doors for you. So in my experience, the alumni are very open, very keen to support each other, very responsive. So you can cold call people who you might not have met before, they might know nothing about you, but because you have that connection of being part of the same school, that really says something about you to them, because they know that you're part of the same culture and you've been through the same experience. And so people are incredibly supportive. And so I think that's something that students sometimes, or candidates sometimes, underestimate is, of course, you get a huge amount from the learning experience during the MBA program, and that will pay dividends throughout your career, particularly in the few years after graduation. But 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, the huge value that you're still getting from it is the relationships and that network that you've got access to. And I see that on a daily basis. So I do think that it's very important for students to think about mapping their future career interests, like Emma was just talking about, and what they want to do and where they want to be, and which alumni base is going to be most relevant for them, because different schools do have different alumni networks, and the US schools do feed very strongly into the US markets. And even, my husband did his MBA here in the Bay Area at Stanford, and the vast majority of his classmates, more than 20 years later, they are still in the Bay Area. So if you're here in the Bay Area, there is no network better than Stanford Graduate School of Business. But he and I have lived in different countries. We've lived in India and Singapore and Indonesia and in Europe. And while we moved around, actually, he drew more on my INSEAD network than on his Stanford network, because I had a much deeper and stronger network in those countries than he did. So I think that's a critical decision point for candidates to think about which network you're buying into when you decide where to apply to business school.
Plus, I imagine you have a really great portfolio of global cities to visit and friends because of the diversity of your cohort.
Yeah. Yes,
So
yeah,
Emma,
you never have to pay for a hotel room again.
indeed. So Emma, final question for you, which is the most obvious question in a way. Who is the ideal candidate for these schools?
So I think I'm going to go slightly philosophical on you and say that the great thing is that there isn't an ideal candidate. So I think all the best schools globally have a very broad range of criteria that they are looking to consider when they're bringing in their classroom. But I think particularly for the international schools, you want to demonstrate all the normal characteristics. So leadership, evidence of leadership, strong career progression, strong goals. But then on top of that, the schools are looking for people who have that real differentiating factor of that international mindset. So people with a passion for global experiences, for exploring, who are comfortable operating across different cultures. You need to be open to different perspectives and really excited by the idea of a global career. I think I would say from my own experience at LBS, certainly candidates who are self-aware. So as Caroline was talking about, how fast some of these programs are, they're not all. I mean, LBS still has its original 21-month model, but 10 months at INSEAD, you need to know why you're going there, what you want to do when you're there, and where you're going when you get out the other end. You don't have a lot of time to sit around and think about it. So being sort of intentional about the choices that you are making is a really important thing. And then finally, I guess if I was to choose one thing, I would say adaptable, because you are coming into a very global classroom, a very global environment where, as I said before, you'll be challenged, you will be opened up to different ways of thinking, of problem solving, of taking decisions, and being able to listen, particularly, but to adjust and to learn from others, and being willing to explore that kind of wonderful sort of, hate the term melting pot, but use it anyway, that sort of melting pot of different cultures and experiences is really, really important.
There you have it. Well, listen, thank you so much, Caroline and Emma. It's been a true
Thank you.
pleasure. And for all of you out there, if you want to help and ease the journey to a great international MBA program, check out Fortuna Admissions. This is John Byrne with Poets and Quants. Thanks for watching.